people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of loss, because in change, a lot is kept, but something has to be let go so that you make space for that gain, that new, that emergent. And often the thing that has to be let go to sort of take us back to this success loop that keeps us stuck is the thing that has to be let go is often the thing that got us the most reward the last time around.
What if creativity, not control, was the key to real systems change? Today's guest, Michael Schert, works with leaders across business, government, and philanthropy to help them navigate complexity and unlock new ways of operating. As the founder of JMS Company and a creative leadership consultancy and a USA Eisenhower Fellow, Michael brings a rare blend of artistic practice, adaptive leadership, and systems thinking. With a background that spans professional ballet, nonprofit leadership, and Harvard-trained adaptive leadership, this conversation explores what really takes to lead when there are no easy answers. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on Innovators Inside.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the pod, Michael. We're excited. To get us started, we have this wonderful, introduction. You've got a diverse background and have done some really interesting things. Do you mind just kind of telling us, how you came to be sitting in this conversation today? Just tell us in your own words a little bit about your journey and how you came to be sort of a thought leader and advisor on topics like leadership and innovation.
Yeah, those words are still always so funny to me, thought leader and advisor. And it's
how many buzzwords can we throw out today? Let's do it.
I mean, people often give us the labels, right? Like rarely do I think we label ourselves. Of course, we have to at times for our LinkedIn profile, put it into language. But how did I end up being a thought leader advisor? Recently, someone called me a leadership artist, which I thought was really fun and a nice merging of worlds. So I'm probably going to use that one, as long as its half-life is worthwhile. I began, as Layne was sharing in the intro, and thank you for that, Layne, as a ballet dancer. And it was both truly, I think, my calling, like my life's purpose, but also was circumstantial. I grew up in South Georgia. My mom had been a dancer, so she was smart enough to put me into some classes. But the family mythology is that the local dance studio wanted one of my older brothers to be in the Nutcracker because she needed some more warm-bodied boys. And my mom said, I don't think the older boys are interested because they were playing sports, football, basketball, baseball. She said, I think my younger son would be. And the mythology is that on one of the first days of rehearsal, I went up to the dance teacher and said, when are we going to dance? I didn't come here just to stand around. And I think that kind of way of being, I was precocious in my youth, maybe even more ambitious in my youth, but I've always tried to focus on what's the work? What are we here to do? Not necessarily the trappings of the form, or ballet is highly regimented, as we all know. It's such a rarefied art. It's super specific. And I love that, but I wasn't one of those people that fell in love with becoming an expert, being the best. But my trajectory led me to boarding school, University of North Carolina School of the Arts, which is a university, but I was there for high school. So I was a high schooler with a bunch of college level folks. Side note, I'm now a trustee of the school, and it's a place that gave me huge, formative, foundational education, not just in how to be a ballet dancer, but how to be an artist, and also just how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a person, a thinking citizen. And then I got to start my career with American Ballet Theater, which is, in terms of ballet, one of the top, big. It's like joining McKinsey right out of school, like a big machine. Beautiful place. But I quickly realized I also didn't want to be in a company that felt a bit to me like a museum company, recreating works of art from, pop culture, Tsarist Russia. I wanted to be creating. And so I started my own company, Trey McIntyre Project, with my partner at the time, Trey. And it was pure happenstance, or not even so much happenstance, just necessity. In addition to being a dancer, in my early 20s, I became an executive director. and starting having to raise millions of dollars. I was a booking agent, so I was booking the company to about 40, 50 tours, cities around the world. And so my business training was just completely on the job. Like, how do you manage a staff of 20? How do you manage an international board of directors? How do you build relationships and a narrative and a public persona for this endeavor? And it was a beautiful time, but I spent my 20s being very responsible for other people. And I didn't necessarily get to do some of the things that 20-year-olds do, like mess around and find out. I kind of just had to get it done, right? And as I was leaving the company that I co-founded, which is, we can get into this later, but for any founders out there, how hard it is to leave something you've built, how hard it is to exit, how hard it is to let something go. We don't talk enough about that. We talk about startups, we talk about building things, but how do you lovingly complete the cycle of birth, of growth, of excellence? At the peak of my company, we were performing at the Hollywood Bowl and Carnegie Hall and theaters around the world. We were featured twice on the cover of the New York Times, and PBS NewsHour came and did a piece. It's like everything was success. And how do you walk away from success? And how does success also become one of your biggest burdens? Because then you think you have to keep recreating that success, and it can become so derivative. So I'm opening up maybe a pathway we might go down in a moment.
We might, because it is something that is, I think, actually a very fundamental question, right? How do you lovingly complete the cycle? How do you let something go? And how do you leave on top rather than feeling trapped? So I do actually want to get there, but it sounds like you actually had a little bit of a self-reflective moment at some point here.
Self-reflective, but maybe again, necessity. There was a moment where I looked around, I was like, I'm supposed to be enjoying this more than I am. And that was the same way I felt when I was at American Ballet Theater, in my early 20s. We were on tour in Athens, Greece, performing at the foot of the Parthenon and the Herodes Atticus. Or not the Parthenon, the Acropolis. And I looked around like, I should be enjoying this more than I am. And I knew I had to leave. And I went in the office the next day and said, I'm leaving. And they said, where are you going to go? I said, I don't know. And it was the same with my company. It was such a beautiful moment, and we had such investment and love from hundreds of thousands of people around the world. But there was a moment where I just said, this is not enough anymore. And I don't mean enough in terms of I needed more, I needed something different. But in a strange twist of fate, I was approached by the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, where fun goes to die, home of Milton Friedman. And I was approached by some of the leadership there, and they said, we have a problem. A lot of our MBAs are not, we're told they're not creative enough when they graduate and go out into the world. Fantastic analysts, brilliant. The MBAs from Chicago Booth are some of the best analysts in the world. And they said, could you come and help us with that? And so then I was offered this really strange, pseudo faculty position. My title was Visiting Artist and Social Entrepreneur. And this was 2013, where the term social entrepreneur was all the rage. What does that even mean? And so I had 4 years then to play in this very foreign land of free market capitalism, which was not the world I had come from. But to your point or your question, Ian, what is the self-reflection, and what is also listening to something like a higher purpose? And I don't mean in terms of a deity or like a higher being. I mean like your own higher purpose. Like, what are we here to do? And that second mountain theory by one of the Brooks, was it David Brooks or Arthur Brooks, who talks about climbing the second mountain. The first mountain in life is climbing success and performing and all the sort of codependent ways that society tells us to be successful. But the second mountain is when you really start to live into your own deeper purpose and your own wisdom. But something I often say to my clients now, you can't jump from one peak to the next. You have to come down. And the coming down is it's sad. It's destructive. You're walking away from the apex. And that's the completing of the cycle. We can think of a cycle. We can think of it like mountain peaks. We can think of it like wavelengths. Like you go up and you come down so you can go back up again. But I think we don't focus enough on that letting go, that coming down, identity shift that's required to truly recreate, allow for creation to happen.
Well, that is really fascinating. And so do you feel like I mean, this isn't a theory that you had going into a complete career change with Booth or elsewhere, I assume, right? And so do you feel like you sort of discovered this in parallel to, David Brooks' writing? And what does that mean for others who are maybe thinking, oh, like I'm supposed to be enjoying this more than I am, and they're not?
Yeah, I had no theory of change at this moment. It wasn't until later, when I was a student at the Harvard Kennedy School, that someone said to me, "Oh, you're a systems thinker." I hadn't realized it at the time when I was at Booth. I was seeing systemic change in myself and in the world, but I had no grand theory of change. Um, I, though, realized at my time at Booth that I wasn't alone. That
Mm.
we're all stuck in these cycles of success, and we might read about it or hear about it until you're experiencing that sort of ego death of letting go of your greatest accomplishments so that you can become something new. You don't really know what that looks like, feels like. I now coach people on that. I now help systems navigate massive change. That's what I do for a living now. But I only think I can do that because I lived it. And that's also something I encourage a lot of my clients. Don't be afraid to live in moments of doubt and uncertainty, because doubt precedes courage. Like, you can't be courageous unless you first have had that deep questioning.
I think that feels fundamentally true. But there's something really interesting here. On this pod, we talk a lot about organizational change and transformation. We talk a lot about adapting to new context, about taking risk, about, the things that sort of feed to innovation. You are taking this to a very personal level. You're taking it down from the abstract organization that needs to adapt to the individual. And, I think that probably resonates with a number of folks in the audience. But is that a unique approach in your mind? Like, when you're working on organizational development, is this new?
I'll say two things. I don't think it's a unique approach, because I think it's almost just sort of naming the elephant in the room, that we already all on an individual level are experiencing that. And yet we subjugate, or we sort of push down our personalized experience because we think it's not professional or shouldn't be present, or we're just horribly inarticulate at articulating what is happening in ourselves and in systems and teams and groups. As you were just saying, there's plenty of theory. I mean, like, you can read Bion and Fisher, you can go deep into Heifetz, you can go deep into all these theories, but you have to practice them and live them. And so the second answer to your question is, I don't think it's unique in communities of artistic practice to use this pursuit, using yourself as data. Like, what am I experiencing? This is very much what I learned as an artist, like, to listen to that intrinsic and then to filter it through the extrinsic demand. And this is then what I learned at Booth, that a lot of methods are taught just to only look at the extrinsic, the external, what you're required to be, the KPI, the what you have to perform, and the key performance metrics. And I think we've done a disservice to a lot of people in our education system and in our professional systems, where we set goals outside of them and expect them to meet them. And we don't necessarily use the individual and the self as the data, and then tweak how do you get there. And so, again, as a coach, as a systems change consultant, as an advisor now, we have to do both. We have to look at the macro, like the system, and understand where we're going and how do we do that, and how do we measure up, and how do we create strategies. That's still all hugely essential work. But a lot of times we're not doing the other part of it. It's called double loop learning, like doing the thing and then learning about ourselves doing the thing, and then doing the thing and then learning about ourselves doing the thing, and tinkering. I would say I learned that primarily as an artist. But I think it's human.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, because you would think as, an entrepreneur or a business person, you do have to think creatively to a certain extent in terms of like, I'm building a solution. How am I going to solve this problem? What's the most efficient way to solve this problem? So what's kind of the difference there between being a creative and being maybe someone that's more logical or technical? What's that blocker that's keeping them from tapping into that sort of intrinsic mentality that you're talking about? Is that just conditioning?
I think it's conditioning. I think it's codependent systems, meaning I'll quote some more theory. There's a fantastic theory professor that I studied with, Robert Keegan, who talks about socialized minds. And we're just so socialized to think in a way that gets you reward, the incentivization for it. And to your question, Layne, like earlier I said, in order to be courageous, you first have to have doubt. In order to be creative, it's a prerequisite that you have to have uncertainty. Like by definition, you can't be creating if you're only working in a derivative system and you're only continuing to deploy yourself and perform in ways that are already rewarded. You're going to just keep delivering very similar outputs. And so there's a necessary stepping out into the unknown, into discomfort, into moments, periods of life, or periods in a day where you're not just trying to perform in this socialized mind to live up to the expectation of your investor, of your customer, and your peers. We all know startups, innovators, they're more influenced by their peers and like the group think of what's good or not. Real innovators, and I think real people that are truly living in a creative process, are willing to not know, and to not know for longer durations of time, because out of that not knowing comes the innovation.
Yeah, an ability to sit in discomfort, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I want to talk about an organizational perspective in a second, but first I want to stick with the human perspective. I think, certainly, I think the common perception of successful artists is that they are outliers, sitting in discomfort, doing things that, others are unwilling to do. I don't know if that's true, not being much of an artist myself, but there is something there that I feels very, almost in some ways, the polar opposite of driving conformist success and organizational success. Is this just all about learning from the attributes that make artists successful, or is there actually something deeper going on here?
I think it's about learning the attributes of humanity that have made us successful. I think artists play a role in society to keep us at the edge of our competence, or to keep us experiencing aspects of society that we don't want to face. Like that's often the role the artist plays. In a similar but different way, it's also the role of activists, to push us to see something from another perspective. But I think it's actually incredibly human, because it's a hallmark of humanity that we have used tools to evolve faster than almost any other vertebrate. Like it's a hallmark of what we do, that we sit in uncertainty and creativity and keep changing. We'd use our post childbearing years to continue to innovate, unlike almost every other species. So is it something we just learned from artists? I think artists can be a great case in point to look at and be like, okay, how do we learn from that? How do we study? But there's a camp, and it's a field of study where it's like the artists come down from the mountain and teach us how to be. I don't buy into that. I think it's that, and I'm also not of the camp. I think these camps are great, but there's also a camp that's like, we're all artists. Just find your artistry inside. They often confuse, though, artistry with artistic practice. Like I'm also not someone's like, just by learning how to dance ballet, you too can create a startup. Like that's not the solution. That's a technical solution for an adaptive problem. What I think we're really getting at is, as humans, we all sit with adaptive challenges. And just for the listener right now, this is borrowing from adaptive leadership, which is a framework that I use. I did not invent it. A technical challenge has a known problem, a known solution. The experts and the authorities need to figure it out, and time and money needs to be allocated, and then you deploy. That's most of the problems on the face of our planet. It doesn't mean People still have to learn and change and grow. But an adaptive challenge, no one really knows fully what the problem is. There's no known solution. You can throw all the technical solutions at it and it will chip away at the problem, like climate change. But in the end, it's not a technical solution that's going to fix it. And it's not the experts and the authorities that can solve the problem. And yes, time and money, experts, authorities are needed. But in the end, we all have to change because we all own a piece of the problem and we all own a piece of the solution. So humans are actually quite good at adaptive change, but yet humans keep telling this intersubjective narrative that we're really like bad at change. And there's a line that I use a lot, which is people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of loss because in change, a lot is kept, but something has to be let go so that you make space for that gain, that new, that emergent. And often the thing that has to be let go to sort of take us back to this success loop that keeps us stuck is the thing that has to be let go is often the thing that got us the most reward the last time around.
And what's really interesting, John Michaels, I think that connects back to tool use and measurements. There's we've had a number of guests on this pod come and talk about the dangers that come with all of the infrastructure that we put in place to help us be successful. The tools that we use, atrophy our brains and our creativity. The systems that we put in place to measure our success and promote it and bring people along for the ride turn out to be, major friction points to, adapting to a new reality. And so you argue a lot that the notion of creativity is not just a nice to have, it's an absolute critical lever for system change. I wonder if you can start to break that down for us. How does creativity actually help organizations confront complexity? And how do you even start? How do you recognize when this is necessary?
There was a brilliant scientist, social scientist I got to work with at University of Chicago, Howard Nussbaum, and he said something really fascinating. He studies wisdom, and he said there's no such thing as a wise person. There's only wise choices. And we have to, I think, shift that shift of wisdom is not a thing. It's, are you making wise choices? And there's conditions for what is a wise choice. And for wisdom, it requires epistemic humility, like choosing to be humble, choosing to not know. A wise choice can't be, again, like a derivative. It has layers of creativity and it has aspects of pro-sociality, like doing something that's good for the greater good. That's wisdom. I borrowed that from him and said, I think there's also no such thing as creativity. And there's no such thing as a creative person. There's creative choices. And a creative choice also has certain hallmarks. Is it novel? And does it have a certain level of utility? Like it's going to do something for us. The fragility of a creative choice is that it can't be validated or verified quantitatively while you're in the process of making it. So what happens in a lot of institutions, corporate structures, organizational structures, is the creative choice is very, very vulnerable and fragile when it's emergent. And people so quickly want to attach these metrics of success to it, like you're quoting a moment ago. And we've validated all these ways of proving when something is worthwhile and how much money should we invest in, how much time. Well, the creative choice rarely is going to be seductive at first. It's going to look pretty ugly. It's going to require loss. It's going to require change. If it were to be implemented, whole systems of people are going to lose something, status. If you're on a team that's been building a product and the product is currently dominant in the market, but it's losing its power and validity, and you need an emergent new product to emerge, but you're on the team, but your product is rocking, you don't want to give that up. You don't want to allow for, now again, a wise person, a creative person, I just said there's no such thing as a creative person or a wise person. A wise choice or a creative choice would be, we have to let some of that market share go so that this other new thing can begin to find its place. It is a place of perceived weakness by certain systems. It's not posturing. It's not proving and validating itself by known metrics. It's actually saying, we don't yet know the metrics of success for this. That's scary. That's scary for a lot of people to embrace.
So, from a leadership perspective, I think it's one thing if you know that or you think you're making the wise choice or the creative choice, how do you lead your team through that uncertainty and get their buy-in and get them to come on that journey with you?
You asked a moment ago just about, do we look to the artist to tell us or guide us? Do we look to authorities to sanction and say, yes, I'm going to create protection for you while you go down this path? You need it all. You do need executives and authorities to protect your team while you're going through it. So different organizations have had different methods. You create a skunk works team, you create like an innovation team, and it's got some protection as it's developing. But that's very specific. We can look to cases in point, like an artist or innovators. And, I also make a living people bringing me in to give presentations to tell them how to be this way. So I'm not trying to downplay, we still need role models. But your question, Layne, I am of the belief that groups of humans form their own meaning. And we actually do arrive at, what is our purpose? Like, if we are on a team that's trying to innovate and we're trying to build something that the world has never seen before, we have to hold that purpose at the center of what we're trying to do. And there will be so many, in adaptive leadership, we call this work avoidance mechanisms. Work avoidance keep taking you away from the deeper work that you got to do, that you got to hold that space to say, no, we're focused on this purpose. The work avoidance mechanisms will look like quarterly reports. Like, are you validating quick enough? Are you proving yourself to your investors, to other teams? Are your peers thinking that what you're doing is worthwhile? Are you getting undercut? And we don't protect that space to stay in that uncertainty and that creativity. So when leading, if you are in a position of leadership and you're leading a team, maybe it's a 5-person team, a 50-person team, a 500-person team, through this process, it's not about knowing. Like, it's not like, I know what we're going to do, follow me, I'm going to lead us to the promised land. It's a knowing of, we have to keep holding at the center that we are here to create something that the world has never seen, or that we have never seen. Now, that's a big, bold statement. And the work avoidance, again, comes in to say, no, but if you don't prove yourself in the short term, we're not going to support you in the long term. So this gets into long-termism, short-termism. So how do you?
But also, doesn't this get in? And excuse me for interrupting. Doesn't this get into the question of, are we actually all here for that purpose? I can walk into a lot of organizations where probably 70, 80, 90% of the people would not necessarily agree at first blush with that statement.
Yep. So do I. I walk into those organizations all the time. We often then wait as humans for a forcing function. We wait for the purpose to be decided for us. We wait till systems are collapsing or a product is failing. And then people are willing to often put that purpose in the center. And I'm often brought in at that point, sadly. I don't have a panacea and an antidote for how we can get ahead of it. But I do believe if we could sooner get to that shared purpose, we would have a lot less pain and destruction. But then there's the theory of, like, maybe we need that destruction for the new to emerge. And so, go ahead.
Well, I really do wonder about the necessity of pain, of being backed into a corner, of friction, whatever it is. But I was going to actually ask about sort of like culture and power dynamics within organizations, right? Because once you're no longer building a startup, once you're sitting inside an established enterprise or, a governmental organization, whatever it is that has had its purpose for some time, it seems to me that it's unfair to expect the majority of the rank and file to push for or desire change at an organizational level. Maybe at an individual level they can. And so it also seems unfair to expect a single leader to, point and everyone to march in lockstep in their direction. So how can a good leader understand the dynamics of setting culture and a desire to think creatively and to make creative decisions without a crisis being imposed from the outside?
Well, good news is crises are plenty right now. So pick your crisis and you can use them as a forcing function. And as there is no such thing as a wise person or a creative person, I also espouse the belief that there's no such thing as a leader. I think there are people in positions of authority who have certain authorizations they have to make, and they have certain people they're responsible for. But leadership is a verb, and anyone can practice it or exercise it. So what is that act of leading people from the status quo into the adjacent possible, from business as usual? It's not everyone's job to lead. It's a choice. You're talking about
Sure.
bureaucracies. We want bureaucracies to work. Their purpose is safety. Their purpose is things working. You want your governments to work. You want fire and police departments to do their core function. Nothing wrong with that. We can talk about innovation in highly bureaucratic systems, maybe another pod, but I think it's a valid topic. I think change and cycles of creativity, they come in cycles. And so you also have to wait for it to ripen. You have to wait for it. Like, is this fruit ready to pick, or is it going to be ready? And can we get ahead of it? Now, back to the question. Or the reason I make that clarification is sometimes we think it's the person in the authority position whose job it is to lead. I think this is a huge paradigm shift we're seeing in the world. The hero myth, the hero journey myth, I think is being a bit undone. It's not going to be singular figures anymore that guide us into the promised land. We've had thousands and thousands of years of that, and I think it served us. But now I think we really are looking at collective, collaborative models of leadership. We have tools like the internet, like social media, like ways of being connected that are allowing us as of humanity, of systems, of teams, to better communicate. But that's a tool. That's not the solution. So how do you, as you're asking, lead in a moment of culture shift? How do you allow people to align at that core purpose? And as you said, you walk into most organizations that there's no clarity there. They're not like, we all agree.
Sure.
That's also not the
If
goal
only.
of oneness. Let's just all be together and agree. I think when you're truly allowing a lot of hidden values and hidden motives and hidden needs to emerge, and then you work with what's really there, that's leadership. And it's not necessarily even having vision is important, but it's not driving towards that vision unilaterally. It's really allowing a system, a team, an organization to choose, we're going to do this together. I'll tell, I hope, a very quick story. This feels a little out of left field, but something that just popped into my head. Years ago, I was in Colombia, Bogota, for a fellowship, and I was meeting with the Wasi tribe. This is an indigenous tribe that for years, for decades, have been overtaken by paramilitary groups and forced to grow heroin, poppy. And it destroyed the fabric of their culture. People that resisted were murdered or just killed outright. Many of the women in the village became prostitutes for the workers that were coming in. Some of the men joined the paramilitary. It was really destroying the fabric of a culture, of a people. And over years and years, but finally the tribe as a whole, and when people would go out there and try to resist again, they would get mowed down. And they finally said, the entire village of like 500 people went out and burned the poppy fields together. And they said, if you want to stop us, you have to kill us all. And they all chose to sort of step forward at this one moment and lockstep. And this was like a purpose, like, we're not going to do this anymore. Fast forward, it's a very popular story in Colombia, to my knowledge. They now grow like award-winning coffee. They're not without danger, but it was this decision that we're all going to step forward and change together. We sometimes think that it's the individual, again, leader or a select group that's going to make the change happen on behalf of everyone else. Taking it back to organizational culture, leadership is helping the system really diagnose itself, really look at itself and say, what's the gap between how we behave and what we do and what we say we are and say we do? And there's a gap between the reality and the aspired reality. And some of the method that I use and preach is leadership is helping people move towards that aspired reality. It's also helping us change our aspired reality and say, actually, those KPIs are a lie. Actually, our metrics of success are keeping us stuck. And we have to let go of 10%, 20% of the narrative we tell ourselves about what success looks like. That then frees up a more bottom-up level of co-creation, not top-down decision making. So that was a long monologue of how do we get at
this sounds a lot more complicated in terms of like an organization, or some sort of like corporate structure. Because if my personal culture or my identity is being threatened, it feels much more incentivized to me to go around to other members of my community to say, hey, I am under threat. Let's go together and change this. So I think it still comes down to like, what's the incentive within a company? And so if we're not using the word leaders and we're using leadership, how can authoritative figures in organizations incentivize the culture of their organization to sort of cultivate that kind of desire to create change within their own organization?
Yeah, and one method is you let the threat in, like whatever the threat is. Your car company who really banked on expansion into China, and it's not working because you're selling European cars in China. And there's a real threat there, a threat to the core of the company. It threatens the values. Let's say it's a German car company, and it's like, but we're Germans. We're the best engineers in the world, and our cars are superior. It's a real threat to say, not in China. Like, people don't really want to buy your car. So how do you let that threat in? To Layne, you're asking, like, if you are in a position of authority, do you hold true at that moment to like your deepest value set of like what you think your product is? Or do you allow the whole company to feel enough of that threat to say, we have to change? So one motivation is we have to change. I'm not telling you to change. Like, the forcing function is there. Another set of methods is people get really entrenched in their roles and responsibilities, the identity of like, well, I'm the CMO. I do this. So cross learning, and even this is a nifty trick, like, making people step away from their fixed role and having to look at the problem from a different angle, even within the same company. Because it's not for lack of, these are all good people. Like, they really care about their job, their company, but they get in their own way. They start to see the problem through their perspective, and they get entrenched in seeing the problem repeatedly through where they sit. So if you're the authority role person, the CEO, your job is to disorient, to allow some disorientation and roles, responsibilities. And that gets back again to incentivization. So you can change some of the structures to say, we're not going to incentivize you to keep performing the way that we've been performing, because that's only going to keep getting us to the same types of outcomes. This is where you could easily get neutralized if you start to mess with people's incentivization, right?
Well, I mean, this is like classic innovator's dilemma friction, right? That we're talking about here is messing with incentives and the lock we get into. But there's something really interesting. So we've had another guest on the pod very recently, who is making some very bold statements in a new book. And they're statements that basically all of the measurements and the systems that we have put in place around, so let's call it corporate structures, are actually the exact things that are making it impossible to make creative or wise decisions. And he talks about things like measuring profit. He talks about things like the focus on accountability to shareholders as being a thing that makes us feel comfortable and makes us feel wise and makes us feel like good capitalists, but actually leads to uncreative destruction of everything that we've built. And I think that's actually a very interesting statement, especially in today's world where we see things like the corporate board fight around OpenAI and a nonprofit entity controlling something that's generated $500 billion in value, theoretically. But man, if this is true, we've got a lot to unwind as a society and as an economic system.
Earlier on this pod, I said, I was dancing with American Ballet Theater, beautiful company. I still love to go watch classical ballet, but it's upholding values and aesthetics and whole narratives from Tsarist Russia and the French
Yeah.
courts of Louis XIV. And we revere it because it's considered rarefied and beautiful and valuable. At one point in time, there was these moments of enlightenment where we developed these ideals, but we're sort of performing these derivative structures. And I think everything you just articulated about a lot of the ways we have validated, verified corporate systems of reward are based on mindsets of the past. And we're still trying to recreate like a golden age of capitalistic America. And we're ignoring some of the truths of now. And I think this is what's so scary. I think if you're in a position of leadership or a position of authority right now in a corporation, is you can't keep playing to the game the rules have changed, and we haven't rewritten rules, and we're honestly not even really listening to what the new rules are. A simple heuristic, 90-10-10. Like at any given moment of change, about 90% is going to stay the same. We think change is everything gets thrown out. But no, actually, it's incremental. The trick is what 10% is no longer serving us. And as I said earlier on this podcast, it's usually the thing that used to really, really work. And are you willing to let it go? And that makes space for what could be. And I don't want to be theoretical about it. I want to be super practical about it. What was working that no longer works? But it usually has a half-life. It seems like it's still working. It seems like it's still selling. It seems like, and then here's the other part that we were getting at earlier. So many people in that corporation have engineered their life and their livelihood to keep supporting that metric. So this is not without human loss and pain to say, yeah, we're going to stop incentivizing that way of operating. So your former podcast, guest, I think they're right. But not that we throw it all out. At what pace of change can we do this? And this gets back to, we often are waiting for the forcing function, the crisis, to change. If we could get a little ahead of it and start to let go of 10% in this cycle, and then 10% in the next cycle, and then after 10 cycles, 100% has changed. But we're not allowing ourselves always to be iterative in that process.
Yeah. What percentage of a typical organization needs to be thinking like this?
I think if you are a bureaucracy and your purpose is safety, the pace of change should be less. And that's part of my personal perspective. We took an axe to our federal government recently, and I think that's seriously a problem. Not because I think our federal government was operating perfectly before, but because the pace of change right now is too much. We don't even know what all the losses are. We're all about to go file our federal taxes, and is that system even working, right? So I think if you're a bureaucracy, and there's many bureaucracies out there, not just governments, the pace of change should be less because it's about stability and security. If you're a startup, the pace of change is more like 50% or more. Everything's changing because you're trying to find market signal. You're trying to find your minimum viable product. You're trying to arrive at like the thing. But if you are, I think earlier you're asking, okay, you're past the startup phase, you're in an established phase, mid-sized company. I think a safe level of change is around 10%. And these are just heuristics. We're throwing numbers out here. It's more the mindset that the change is constant, that you don't do a sprint and then rest on your laurels, that you have to actually be entertaining a level of discomfort, uncertainty, doubt on the daily, but that seeing it as an asset, not as a weakness.
Well, you are absolutely, I think, preaching to the choir for many of our audience members, right? Audience members who are sometimes agitating to think differently within their own organizations, who are trying to understand, the changing context that we're all operating in, but the antibodies, the structures that exist sometimes feel absolutely insurmountable. So, if you had one or two nuggets of wisdom for, somebody who wants to not just, make creative decisions, not just make wise decisions themselves, but kind of like, throw the pea under the mattress and start to agitate around them? What would you suggest they do?
I'll give three, but number one is you can't do it alone. Like, there's no way you can do this alone, nor should you think you can. You have your personal work to do, wherever you're positioned in the company, your rank, your title, your status. That's your formal authority, but you also have informal authority. Informal authority is trust, respect, love, loyalty. And a lot of times I think people start to agitate and they think
Emotion. These are emotional words.
yeah, and your social capital. So many people that realize they are awakening to like, oh, this has to change, but they go it alone, or they think that, and they do it out of good intentions. Often they're trying to protect other people, or they're trying to protect, again, like people's livelihoods, and they're willing to put themselves in a position of discomfort, but they're not willing to actually build a coalition. And part of what I do as a consultant is help in a non-normative way. It's not good, bad, right, wrong, but can we really name the problem right now? And are we really all willing to engage in it? And we have to do that together. That requires a level of psychological safety and trust. There's real methods to do that. So the first is to the listener right now, you can't go it alone. The second is you have to begin by listening. 80% of failure is a failure of diagnosis. You think you see the problem, you think you also know the solution, and you jump too quickly to what you think the solution is, and you don't spend enough time diagnosing. A patient comes in to see a doctor, and the doctor looks at the symptoms. It's so easy to be like, well, yeah, here's a drug for that. Are you really looking at the underlying problems? Are you spending enough time looking at the environment, the macro environment, the systems around it? Are you really looking at the interpersonal level of decision-making within a company? We think that we're clean machines, right? We think the logical human, homo economicus, or whatever the term is, we think that we make logical decisions. We don't. So many decisions that get made in a company are based on peer pressure or how we're thought of by each other. So are you really able to subject object? You're not the subject. Make the problem an object that you can all look at and study together. And that it begins by listening and spending way more time in the diagnostic. And then the last that kind of touches upon them both is we're interdependent to each other. Earlier, I talked about socialized minds, codependent systems, where you do what's expected of you, you get rewarded for that, it reinforces that loop, you just keep doing it. Then there's a phase that Keegan talks about of moving towards self-authoring minds, of being independent, having your own ideas and your own ability to perceive and see the object. That's I think a lot of the listeners that you're quoting right now, Ian, are in that or moving into that self-authoring mind. They're seeing the problem and they want to work it, but they maybe get stuck in their own independence or their own self-authoring. And it's not their fault. Again, we've had a hero worship type of culture for a long time, especially in corporate settings, especially in startup settings. The goal is to move towards interdependent ways of working, being a self-transforming mind, like seeing a system, being in the system, but not of it. My faculty advisor in grad school was Cornel West, and he would always say, be in the system, but not of it. But he was quoting Jesus Christ. Like, how do you step into something, but not let it so overwhelm you that you just buy into the metrics of success?
Sure.
You're able to step out of it and then build coalitions and ideas and movements, and also partner with your quote unquote enemies, like partner with people that think differently, find true, like bipartisan, if there's politics, ways of approaching the problem. Because the more like sets of different thinking we have addressing it, we're going to build a much more robust diagnosis of what it is. And then lastly, at some point you do have to act. You can't just stay in analysis paralysis. You can't just also keep getting pushed back by failure and dominant cultures reinforcing. You have to allow that space for emergent culture, but then you also have to at some point say, okay, let's run some experiments. Let's actually
Yes.
try this. And of course, classic startup mentality, fail, early, fail fast, like run some low cost experiments, test. And I'm talking about cultural experiments within a company, shifts of, again, changing incentivization structures, changing behaviors within meetings, changing how reward and psychological safety is rewarded. These are real, tangible, tactical approaches. And then once you do that, you start to then get data from your experiment. And then you say, okay, well, now let's revisit the problem with this new set of information. This is all theoretical, but it's practical. But I'll draw it back to my own experience. This is exactly what it feels like to be a ballet dancer. And you come off stage and you just put a product out in the world, but the next day you have to receive notes and critique, and you have to revisit you're going to do the same ballet again tonight, but it's a living, breathing thing. It's never the same. And so what are you allowing to change? You still have to do the choreography. You still have to do the steps. You don't get to change it all. But what you're tweaking is how you interpret those steps. What experiments do you want to run around pacing, timing, sequencing? That's what I learned as an artist. And I think it's fully applicable in corporate organizational systems. How we're innovating in the space in between the fixed points. That's where art is made. That's where innovation happens. And then every now and then, after you've run enough experiments, you can say, okay, we can let this pillar go. We have enough proof and validation now that we can let this pillar go. But don't start with saying, we're going to cut this pillar out. That's usually destined to fail.
Well, absolutely. Not only beautiful sentiments there and some frankly poetic language, John Michael, but I think some really important reminders, right? We live in a world where it feels like we have to use the sharp elbows to create space and time to listen and ask questions. And it feels very difficult sometimes to run experiments, especially on culture. Like it's one thing to, prototype a piece of code and throw it out there and see what happens, but to run experiments on people. But I think the point that you make that even the most refined art forms, right? Art forms that may harken back to Tsarist Russia and beyond, have, almost a requirement in them to listen, to adapt. I actually think that's really, really interesting. And then I think the other thing that's really interesting is we can't be trapped by these forms, right? I've heard you say, tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I've heard you say that, this form is static. This form does harken back to another era, and it is a refined art form, but perhaps we need to use that as a launch pad for some new form of creativity, some new thing that we do. I think these are really powerful lessons, and John Michael, have really appreciated internalizing them with you.
Yeah. What do we keep? What do we let go of? And what do we gain? What do we innovate on? And I can't stress enough that you can't do it alone, because you have to truly listen and you have to pace it. You have to figure out what can the system handle. And then you got to keep the system responsible and accountable to stay right at the edge of its competence. But if you let it slip back into comfort too often, it's not learning, it's not changing.
So, John Michael, we're just coming up to the end of our time here together. For folks that are interested in connecting with you and learning more about what you do, where can they find you? Are you on LinkedIn? Do you have, a website? Where are you chilling out these days?
Yeah, LinkedIn, I think professionally is the best and strongest. Can always Google. I've got a lot of content and performances and presentations I've put out there. But in terms of reaching out, I've built up a network of about 30 collaborators, consultants around the world who do incredible things. And when clients reach out, we create customized teams to really go in and help them. And I'm super proud of the work that my team and I do. And so we're always looking for new challenges, but also the challenges are not always new. They're getting replicated in Europe, and then it's showing up in Asia. And part of our job is to help create those through lines and help realize that what we're facing right now is on a humanity scale. And how can we help? How can we be a guide? Or as someone, as I said recently, called me a leadership artist. Our job is not to do the work. Our job is to help you do the work, but our job is to hold you in that and to give you tools, yes, but also and to teach you those tools, but then to, like a coach or a gym trainer, make you do the work. Like, give me 10 more push-ups. You got it. Okay, here we talked about it, we theorized it. Now go do it. Go run that experiment. So I think LinkedIn is great, and I'm always excited to work with people that are right at that verge of change, and they just don't know what to do because they're facing an adaptive challenge. And that's where I think my team and I are most helpful.
Awesome.
Incredible. Well, John Michael, founder of JMS and Company, thank you for coming on Innovators Inside. This has been super fun, and I can't wait to continue the conversation at some point in the future.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be a part of this world. Thanks.
Catch you next time. Cheers.